Hi, this is the WTF SDK zone creation tutorial part 1. In the previous tutorials, we have gone through how to create animation packages, playable characters, and non-playable characters. So now we are going to go back and take an in-depth look at how to create a more appealing zone for the players and characters to inhabit than this, complete blackness. So before we start, I'm going to look at, once again, some of the materials that I have prepared for this zone. And I am going to also move them over to the tutorial project folder. Once again, you need to make sure that all these images reside in the resource folder. And in this case, I'm going to copy all these files for the forest zone over here. And once again, once you imported these resources into the zone, you don't want to be moving these images around or renaming them because they are basically associated by a link directly to the file name. So I am also going to show you very quickly a couple of these images. So those are the images that I'm going to use. And notice that they're actually seamlessly looping from the left to the right, and you will kind of see that when I actually import these images into the editor. And I shall do so right now. So we already had a starter zone that we've been working with in order to actually see the characters and the players from the other tutorials, and I'm just going to work with that since we might as well make the zone that the characters appear in look pretty. So now it's time to kind of go over some of the more in-depth elements. We have the layer panel, which basically keeps track of the different parallax layers that the game has, and it is actually kind of dynamically changing depending on which editing panel that you've selected down here. By default, when the zone editor loads, it goes to the zone panel, which allows you to set some default settings for the entire zone. Like background music, zone width, and I probably want to adjust that really soon, but not now. Ground position is the Y position of all the characters that appears in the zone. 410 is about down here. This entire thing is 510 tall and 750 wide. As a word of caution, you also want all the looping backgrounds that I show you to be at least 750 pixels wide so that it covers the entire screen. There is also a upper limit that you need to be aware of. You can't have an image that's wider or taller than 2048 pixels. That is a flash limitation and not one inside the program, by the way. So let's actually pretty this thing up. We need more layers. So, and as I've shown, we have 3 images, so I am going to create 2 more layers. I already have a background layer by default because it's required, and I am going to create now a midground and a foreground. And as you can see, the way I arrange these layers is that the topmost layer is going to appear closer to, well, basically they appear more toward the front of the screen, much like how layers work in Photoshop. So as I'm creating and selecting this layer, you would see that the editing panel actually change itself dynamically to the layer panel. So when I click on a layer, it actually chooses that particular layer, And notice that I actually quickly glossed through it, but I can double click on a layer's text portion to make changes to the name, which is pretty much standard to any kind of list interface that you encounter in the editor, except for some very particular cases like the file names in the content editor, which came from the system and not customizable. So what I want to do is import images for each of these layers. So I'm going to go back to the zone that all the files that I imported. Notice that when I hit import, it automatically goes to the resource folder because that's pretty much where everything has to be. This is the background image, so this is the background layer, so I'm going to import the background image. I'm going to go to the midground and import the midground image. Go to the foreground and import the foreground image. So first thing I want to do is adjust the position of these layers vertically. You will notice that there's just a position adjustment and not a XY adjustment, and it will become apparent soon after that. These backgrounds are looping backgrounds, meaning that they will repeat indefinitely horizontally. So I want to make sure that this covers the bottom. And then I go to the midground and do the same thing. I'm going to drag this down so that it covers the foreground perfectly. It's actually always nice to go a pixel or two over in case there's some pixel problems with quality settings in Flash where it tends to be a pixel or two off, so you want to make sure that the images cover themselves completely with a little bit of extra. So the layers are ready, so I'm going to adjust the scroll speed next. And in order for me to have any kind of area to work with, I need to go back to the zone panel, selectable through this drop-down list, and I need to adjust the size of this zone, which is defaulted to one screen. And it's kind of hard to see, but once I adjust the size of the zone to 20, I guess that's too big, 10,000, you can see there is an actual window into which we only see a part of the zone. And it's kind of weird right now. Even if I scroll this thing around, it's not adjusting like this, it's not scrolling. And that is because, and I'm going to click around this thing again and open back up the layer panel, none of these has an actual scroll speed assigned to it. And what you want to do is, oops, this is the background layer, is to set a scroll speed, let's go 1.0, that corresponds to how fast you want the layer to scroll relative to how fast the player is moving through the zone. So let's add a bit of and here in the zone editor, I can use the arrow keys to simulate how a player moves through the zone. Specifically, what you want to do is to set the scrolling speed of the layer that you want your player to be in at 1.0. So you will notice that I have set the foreground scrolling speed to 1.0 because that's where I want the player to stand at. And as a final note before we go back to test, I want to change the character layer, which is the layer that the character stands at, from background to foreground. Because what happens is, the players are going to appear here, and if the players are attached to the background, he is going to be here behind the midground and the foreground. So I want to make sure that the character is in this particular layer, and I want to make sure that the foreground scrolls at the same speed that the player does. Now if I actually want stuff that's in front of the player, I can actually add more layers here, dump more objects, or create more backgrounds, but for now that's good enough. I'm going to save and I'm going to test. So I am going to go back to my tutorial project, launch it, and here we go. Same zone, but now looks much nicer. And you can kind of actually see the parallax scrolling already working in the background. And you can feel the foreground making sense, and it's scrolling at the same speed as my player character's movement speed. So that's basically it for our first part of this tutorial. In the next part we are going to go over how to transition from one zone to another.